You talk about a magnetic personality. Well, Jesus was that, at least. Remember, he does this curious miracle for a Gentile woman. He heals her daughter. And then in verse 29 of Matthew's chapter 15, Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee, which that was not uncommon, right? You just see so much of Jesus' life taking place along the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up to a mountainside and sat down. It's kind of like, I don't think Jesus didn't send out flyers. He didn't send the disciples to figure out how can we get, the publicity and let everybody know. He just showed up, and holy cow, did other people. This is verse 30. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. I can't say every disease known in Jesus' day was represented on that list, but I can't think of anything that was left off. And he healed them. And Matthew writes this almost like he's saying, like he always does. Verse 31, the people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the cripple made well, the lame walking, the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. Now there's some meaning there that'd be easy to miss. Jesus does the miracles, and the people are awed. They're not just fascinated. They were amazed. So what was the purpose of Jesus' miracles? Well, I think it's safe to say there were two purposes. One was to meet the need of the people who were healed. He had compassion on them, and he healed them. But a second one would be to point to something even bigger than the healing. I guess what I'm saying is they were signs, and signs point to something else. And he succeeded because they praised the God of Israel. That's what he wanted them to do. Now, I think he also had in mind that surely after seeing these miracles happen, they would believe he was who he said he was, who he was. Verse 32, Jesus called the disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days, and they have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. Okay, very pragmatic of Jesus. And compassionate. But keep in mind, there's something here that will give a bigger picture, a more complete picture of Jesus sitting down on this hillside and people flocking to him. Let's keep going. He said, I don't want him to collapse on the way home. His disciples answered, where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? Now, this is just me. It wasn't that long ago that Jesus fed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish, right? So I'm thinking, whichever of the disciples responded to Jesus in this way may have kind of had one eyebrow raised, like, where are we going to find that kind of bread? Oh, I know where we'll find it. Verse 34. How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied, and a few small fish. That's a little bigger on the resources. he told the crowd to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. Okay, fewer basketfuls. The feeding of the 5,000, there were 12 basketfuls. Now there's 7. The number of those who ate was 4,000, besides women and children. Okay, once you get past 1,000, that's a huge crowd. If you've ever been in a crowd of 1,000, now I'm not talking about a sports complex. I'm just talking about a crowd that you've been a part of that was 1,000 strong. That's a big, big crowd. 4,000? That's a huge crowd. And that was only the men. And why? And I'm not much of a numbers guy. If you know me, numbers and I are not friends. Well, that tells me there weren't just lots of people that found Jesus up on that hill. Thousands found him. And I'd have no doubt that as he was healing the sick and those who needed to be healed, the word spread and the crowd grew and grew and grew. We're not talking about hundreds. I mean, that would have been impressive enough, wouldn't it? Verse 39, after Jesus had sent the crowd away, he got into a boat and went to the vicinity of Magadan. It's kind of like day's work's done. So climbed in a boat. And I have to believe that it wasn't just any old boat. I think it was Peter or Andrew's or James or John's. In verse 16, chapter 16, yeehaw, we're moving forward. The Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. They didn't demand it, because at other times they did. But here they just asked. And this is how Jesus replied in verse 2. When evening comes, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus then left them and went away. It's a fairly brief encounter. There were no weathermen in Jesus' day, but a fisherman needed to have some idea of what the weather was going to be. And Jesus said, you look around and you notice the clouds. You notice the sky. Those are the signs. But you don't, speaking directly to these Pharisees and Sadducees, you guys don't, I mean, you can tell what the weather might be, but you seem to not have a clue about what's going on in real time. And then this verse 4, a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a miraculous sign. Is it wrong to look for a miraculous sign? Well, bear in mind, he's not talking broadly here to everybody. He's talking to the Sadducees and Pharisees, and they criticized him at every turn. They were trying to find a way to rub him out. And it's directly to them. You wicked and adulterous generation. Okay, when you think about adultery, an adulterous generation, I think Jesus was speaking metaphorically here. not necessarily literally. However, is there not a fairly good chance that some of those Pharisees and some of those Sadducees were wearing a mask and they kind of had a shadow life, and maybe they actually were adulterers in the physical sense? I don't know. I do know that there is such a thing as spiritual adultery. And that would be giving my affection, my heart, and my mind to something other than God Himself. Well, the Pharisees and the Sadducees both had, by this time in history, become quite political. And, as I think always happens in a political movement, the objective soon and by now had become power. Power over others. Gee, that hasn't gone away, has it? And Jesus says, okay, the only sign I'm going to give you guys is the sign of Jonah. And then that's it. And then he left them and went away, as though, he drops this thing and then he just turns around and walks away. I don't think they would have understood. They didn't seem to get it when he said the sign of Jonah. Well, excuse me. We know the story of Jonah. Well, they knew the story of Jonah, but on this side of the cross, we know that Jesus was in the belly of the earth 3 days. Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days. There's one other thing I wanted to draw out of this, and it's that Jesus, in this instance, wasn't argumentative. He was just confident. And he drops the truth, kind of a truth bomb, and turns around and walks off. He's not going to further engage. He's not in this debate with them. And this was not a political debate. This was a theological and heart debate, because what Jesus was talking about was the condition of their hearts and the theology of the story of Jonah. And he didn't elaborate. Sometimes the smartest thing that a Christian can do is just don't say it all. Now, speak up. It's not like Jesus said, "Oh, I don't have time. I'm not, we're not, can't we just agree to disagree?" He didn't do that at all. He confronted it up front, just, and without holding, he didn't need to be politically correct. As a matter of fact, there was no such thing as political correctness until not very long ago. So, is there an example there? Is there something there for us? Well, it's like I said. I think sometimes the smartest thing we can do is just shut up and walk away. Jesus wasn't rude. He was confident enough that he said his piece, turned around, and walked away. It's a pretty good pattern to follow. Well, I'm going to quit a little early, and I'll see you next time on So Care with Steve.